Welcome back, everyone. My name is Reed Blakemore from the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, here with another live from COP28 at the Global Decarbonization Accelerator Pavilion. I'm joined today by Jason Bordoff, the founding director of the Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy at the Columbia School on International Public Affairs. Jason, thanks for coming today. This is a little bit of a kind of a meet your heroes type moment for me. I've been following your work for so long.
That's really nice. Thanks.
But we're at a transformational moment, right, in the COP process. COP28, this is the most widely attended COP I think we've seen in some time. It comes at a moment where we really need to get the ball rolling on a lot of things. This is an implementation and action COP, a stock take happening. What are your expectations for this COP? And what do you think are the key issues that we need to tackle?
Well, this is the global stock take, of course. So it's a time when we're supposed to step back and see how we're doing on achieving the climate goals we've committed to, net zero by 2050, so many countries and companies. And so, as we've often written about in the work we've done at the Center on Global Energy Policy, two things can both be true at the same time. There's an enormous amount of progress to celebrate. The outlook for temperature rise by 2100, say, today is much better than it was before the Paris Agreement. It is also the case that it is nowhere close to being on track for a target like 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, or right now even 2 degrees Celsius warming. So we have so much work to do. Emissions are still going up each and every year. They haven't peaked and started to decline yet, nevertheless fall at the rate that we would need them to. So we've seen some pretty exciting developments so far. Pledges and commitments on nuclear power, on renewables, significant commitments yesterday on methane, with some funding for monitoring, enforcement, oversight, satellite technology. All of that is really encouraging. Some progress in something that could have gone sideways, which was a loss and damage fund, to try to make sure that we don't see a rupture between wealthy and lower income countries around the world. So that's all encouraging. But as we talk about almost every year, the narrative in almost every COP in recent years has been we need to go beyond pledges to action. We're still doing a lot of pledges, and we need to see a lot more action coming out of this COP in Dubai.
I mean, you mentioned the huge amount of pledges that are going on, and a really impressive almost diversity of issue sets that are being covered. What do you find as particularly exciting or potentially having the most impact to to either happen at this COP or be carried forward out of this COP?
When you've had so many companies and countries committing and pledging to net zero by 2050, and we're not on track. So then when you take components of that, like if we were on track, we'd be tripling renewables by 2030, and people commit to a component of it. I understand why people might be skeptical. Well, why is that going to be any different? I do think one thing that is notable about this COP, and for all the attention that it's gotten, something that in particular a major energy producer like the UAE has been able to bring to the table, is we can't have this energy transition unless national energy companies and state-owned energy companies come on this journey too. And that's kind of just getting started. So one thing I'm hopeful of, it's by no means certain, but I'm hopeful of, is that in terms of the players around the table to start talking about what pathways look like and what needs to change, starting to bring more and more nationally owned companies into that conversation has the potential to be something transformative. But again, we got to stay the course and really keep this work moving ahead.
It's all about not only establishing that inclusivity in a way, but acting on that inclusivity and having some strong outcomes to come from that.
I mean, as I wrote, I had a piece in the New York Times a few months ago on this, and noted that, for all the companies that get a lot of attention and are very controversial, BP, Shell, and Exxon, they're about 15% of the world's oil and gas supply. The majority of the world's oil and gas comes from, again, nationally owned companies. We need to make sure they're part of that conversation too, because if there's resistance there, if there's lack of an appreciation for the urgency of the climate crisis, we're just not going to be able to get to these goals.
Absolutely. So there's a lot going on now at this COP, right? But obviously, we're going to leave Dubai in 2 weeks, and we're going to be on the implementation pathway. Looking ahead to 2024, the next COP or perhaps beyond, what do you think the big pieces that we need to carry forward are from this COP? And how might the next year be shaped in a way by what we decide here these couple weeks?
Well, there's so much going on at a place as broad as Columbia University and the Center on Global Energy Policy. We think about our work in three broad buckets. One is the geopolitics of climate change and the energy transition. The second is how to accelerate net zero pathways. And then the third is, broadly speaking, the global south, the emerging and developing economies where most of the growth and emissions are going to come from. And so much capital needs to go into that part of the world. So we're trying to focus here at COP and then in our work moving forward on a couple of important priorities that we think fall squarely at the intersection of those three in the Venn diagram, and also that are, in our view, not getting enough attention more broadly. An example of that is how to mobilize capital to finance the energy transition and adaptation in emerging and developing economies much more quickly. And most of that's going to be private capital, not public capital. But how can public capital catalyze and de-risk some of that private investment? The second, we spent time in partnership with the Munich Security Conference here, highlighting the issues of climate and security. We are seeing climate change rapidly emerging as one of the destabilizing geopolitical forces of the 21st century. I've written a lot about how the energy transition itself, the effort to accelerate the push toward clean energy, if not carefully managed, could pose its own geopolitical risks, and we need to de-risk that so we don't stumble along the way to net zero, because if energy security, if energy affordability are in any way perceived to be at risk as we accelerate the transition, it's just going to make it harder to have one. And we're doing a lot of work at the center and here at this COP on two issues that relate to that. One is on trade and climate. We need to make sure that trade, and we will need a lot of global trade to get to the kind of goals we're talking about. And so we need to make sure that trade tariffs, the push toward industrial policy, doesn't become a headwind that makes it harder to get there. And some tools we have in trade policy could accelerate the clean energy transition if used well. And the second is the massive increase in critical minerals that we're going to need for this transition. And it was great to partner with the Atlantic Council on a discussion on that today, recognizing how significant that increase is. It would be hard enough to scale supply chains at the rate we need for copper, lithium, and all the rest just left on their own. If you want to do that in a way that increases security and resilience by diversifying supply chains, say China's role, that's even harder. And it's harder still if you want to do it in a just and equitable way that respects the rights of indigenous and tribal communities around the world. So the massive amount of minerals we're going to need is something growing recognition of that, but we need a lot more understanding, and we need the capital markets to be talking to policymakers much more.
I mean, just those two issues alone, the growth of the resource base we need to meet these energy transition goals, but also how we're going to share and trade, not just the resources, but the technologies themselves. They're all kind of coming to a head here. And I think this is the first COP that'll have a trade day where those issues are going to be stuck. So,
and the head of the WTO was here, and she was very articulate about the importance of trade for the energy transition. Absolutely. If we throw out protectionist barriers, it makes it more costly and it slows it down.
We'll be doing a lot more of these live from COPs over the next couple of weeks. Please join us for the next time. Until then, so long. And Jason, thank you again.
Thanks again for the conversation and all the work you're doing.
Pleasure.